You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
All right, I'm pulling back the curtain here. Here's exactly what my plan was coming out of our last conversation. I was thinking, all right, we just finished up the book of Esther, or the text of it at least. We've considered how people would have thought about this era, the Xerxesian era, that Esther feels like a slice right out of the middle of. And then I teased at the end of our last conversation that now we should probably go and look at some of the legends and myths and expanded versions of the story that cropped up over the years, not because they might be true. No, they're clearly not true. And even the people who put them forward knew they weren't true. Rather, it's fan fiction. It's riffing on the story. And that tells us about how people in different parts of the world and at different times have read and internalized this story, how the story has pushed them, how parts of this story have agitated them, how parts of this story have caused them to find hope or caused them to read meaning into this that kind of fits with their moment. And I don't want to take a ton of time on that, but that is still something that I think we need to consider before this is done, because how stories are interpreted at different times is a huge part of what the story is. And Esther is probably one of the most open-ended to interpretation books in the whole Bible, just because of how it's written. There's very little instructive stuff, like, hey, everybody ought to do this. There's very little exemplary stuff. Hey, be just like Mordecai. If you find out about a plot against a public official, this is how you should handle it. It really isn't stuff like that. It's a story, and I think the story has some pretty obvious thematic implications. And I got to thinking, well, before we go and look at what other people did and the way they tinkered with the themes and ideas and motifs and underlying point of the story over the centuries, we should probably just go right now and think for a moment about what the themes and motifs and the main point is here. Let's take that in and let's think about it while it's still fresh. Now, this might feel like it's 8th grade English class. Again, we're going to talk about stuff that was really hard. I don't think I did that well on that test. That isn't that much fun. But here's the thing. I'm always telling you this, and I really mean it, and I hope you hear me on it. You are very good at interpreting things. It is one of your strongest skill sets of all your skill sets. And just because you might not have gone to school or learned all the fancy terminology or whatnot that fancy story people use doesn't mean you're not great at it. You have this advanced algorithm that you have built for interpreting meaning and intent. Think about how many times you've had an interaction with somebody and you go and try to relay it to somebody else. And they're like, well, I don't know. It seems like it was pretty harmless. And you're like, nah, if you were there, you would have known. And you're probably right every time you say that, because there are a bajillion little subtle details that you catch and calculate and add up to come to an analysis of meaning. You can interpret commercials. You know when somebody's lying to you. You know how to interpret bias. You know how to interpret music. I was sitting with some kids the other day, and I played music for them, some classical music, and maybe I told you this already, but they were able, just by listening to it, to almost reason to what the name of In the Hall of the Mountain King was, just by listening. Or no, I'm sorry, it was Night on Bald Mountain. They just figured it out by listening to it. The point is, you're great at this, so maybe you didn't need the pep talk, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. One of the key theses of this whole thing that we do together here is the belief that we can handle our business with the Bible. This is a big, intimidating book, but you can know what it means, and you can do this work for yourself. Well, maybe in the service of bolstering that optimism, and maybe just because I'm feeling flush with time because I'm going to take 2 days on this, let's pick something that is a little more recent and just warm up our thematic analysis interpretation skill set just a little bit. If you haven't seen this movie, it's going to be okay, but if you have, it's going to be even better. Let's talk about the magnificent 2008 Pixar film WALL-E. For my money, it is among the top 5 best movies that humans have produced in this millennium. It says so much stuff. It is so emotionally rich. And it does it in a really subversive way because it almost opens like a silent film just with Foley sound over the top because you have characters on screen who don't talk. But when you get to the end of WALL-E, which for those of you who don't know is a story about a little trash loader robot who is on Earth, the last living or functioning robot on Earth, hundreds of years after humans in the future destroyed everything. And what we find out is that they're still humans, but they're on a colony ship that's just been floating around killing time, waiting for the planet to become habitable again. And in the meantime, all the people have gotten super, super fat with no bone density, and all of their needs are catered to. And they're basically living on this luxury space yacht, having everything they want all the time and totally losing touch with what it is to be a human being. It's pretty prescient of aspects of what smartphones have done to us today, too, in terms of just how the people interact and how they function. Okay, so let's just do the exercise. Maybe pause it for a second and think back on this movie, if you've seen it. If not, that's okay. And buzz through. What are some of the themes? What's some of the stuff that's in there? And then I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. That was your pause time. And now here's some of the things that I think are there and that are kind of unmissable. First, the robots don't talk, or they barely talk, but their actions speak so much louder than the hollow words of their human counterparts. And so there is a clear speech versus action theme going on. There's the theme of sloth, that WALL-E works endlessly trying to clean up this uncleanable mess, while the people have completely given themselves over to doing nothing. Then there's the theme of technology not necessarily making us better. We invented all these things, but we still wrecked the world and we can't function as humans anymore. There's the theme of compassion and love and innocence and all of that. There's the theme of duty versus freedom. The people have the freedom to do whatever they want. What do they use it on? Riding around in scooters with screens over their faces, being not humans. But the robots don't have any freedom. They have duty and obligation. And when they eventually do get some freedom, they use it to accomplish great things and to save humanity. Another one of the big themes is how the old things that the people made ultimately come back and reconnect the struggling, flailing remnants of humanity with something nobler and better that existed in their past. Their former creations and creativity speak back into their current failures and bring about a sense of revival. It's a robust story with robust themes, and movies that don't have robust themes, of course, never get mentioned as greatest films of the millennium, but a show like this that's full of them does. Okay, well, what do we have with Esther? I think there are a stack of them, and I think they are all as glaringly obvious as that stuff from WALL-E is, and we're not going to get to them all here. We're going to split this into 2, and so we'll cover them all that way. Theme number 1 that I see in the book of Esther, or motif or undercurrent, is humor. The book is legitimately funny, and it's not just the point is like, oh, well, you know, be funny, because funniness brings joy, and it's better to laugh about things, and laughing is the best medicine and all of that. But the humor is all set against the backdrop of another one of the big themes, maybe the biggest theme of Esther, that being God's providence and power. He is the one who is steering history with a billion little things that all had to bounce just the right way. There's no coincidences. There's no flukes. And so part of the humor of Esther is how the hubris that some of the characters have in imagining that they are actually controlling this outcome. And crazily enough, it's Haman's wife who seems to be the first one to figure out that we're totally out of control. There's something much bigger at work here. And so all of the grand power flex gestures of humanity in that book end up resulting in egg on the face. They constantly end up boomeranging on the person who acts like that or talks like that, and then they look silly and ridiculous. And so the humor in Esther very much is at someone else's expense. Now, maybe that humor plays particularly well right now because it's been much more fashionable and acceptable in the last 10 or 15 years to, quote, punch up. You can only criticize or crack jokes about powerful people. I personally think it's funnier when we crack jokes about literally everything and literally everyone, most notably ourselves. I think we are maybe just starting to see the up climb toward things being funny again as a return from, ironically, the moment where I think things started getting less funny, which was 2008. But there's a grander sense of thematic humor in the Book of Esther, even than just the modern convention of we're going to punch up and criticize powerful people. There's also the absurdist isn't the right word, but the philosophical big picture humor view of, oh, we all fuss and fidget and we all worry about everything so much, but ultimately life and forces bigger than ourselves shape things and make everything go. The humor all points to this philosophical witticism, this big picture view of things. It's not the humor of a young man. It's the humor of an old man. Does that make sense? When I say it, it makes sense in my brain. I don't know that I'm communicating it fully. I might have to stew on that one a little bit. But the first pervasive theme, I mean, there's not any order to this list, that I see that is worth mentioning is that this is as funny a book as we get anywhere in the Bible, and I don't think it's just because whoever wrote it had a good sense of humor and wanted to crack some jokes. I think they're making points with this, and I think that humor is a product of some theological assumptions that come up in other themes of the book that we'll look at next time around. So in the same way that we absolutely for sure have the capacity to go and watch a great work of art like the film WALL-E and get to the end and feel a ton of emotions at once, some of them in conflict with themselves. We feel criticized, we feel encouraged, we feel emboldened, we feel a sense of love, regret, remorse. All of those things can happen at once, and it's a result of a whole bunch of themes happening at once. And in the same way that we're able to see that, because we are all practiced interpreters, even if we use different vocabulary to describe what we're seeing and what we're feeling. So I believe that we have the ability to do the same thing with a book like Esther, another phenomenal work of, call it art, call it a cultural text. It's great historical storytelling in Scripture, and I'm tremendously optimistic about our ability to look at it and discern what these themes are. Last note, though, I'm also very confident that in the same way we can look at the movie WALL-E and say beyond a shadow of a doubt that one of the main themes or lessons there is not oral hygiene is very important. Make sure to brush and floss daily. So we can look at Esther and say decisively, there are certain things that are not the theme of Esther. Looking at the theme and interpreting a thing is not just a free-for-all. Common sense tells us that stuff means stuff. And even though we don't calculate what it means the same way we do with charts and facts and figures and science on other more physically tangible, measurable, repeatable things, still, there's stuff that things mean and there's stuff that things don't mean. And so when it comes to WALL-E or Esther or anything, there's certain stuff that, no, it's just out of bounds. It doesn't mean that. But I want to put a pin in that mentally, because when we go and look at some of the stuff that people have done with Esther over the years, we'll see that it so dramatically changes it that even the bedrock themes and ideas that undergird it change as well. Okay, that's quite a bit. We're going to pick up right where we left off tomorrow and talk more about the themes, the big picture stuff that we see undergirding the book of Esther. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.